Welcome to Life Stories, where we bring you heartfelt tales that inspire, move, and teach profound lessons about life. Today's story follows Emma, a woman whose world was turned upside down when her husband abandoned her and their unborn twins. What unfolds is a journey of resilience, love, and transformation as Emma fights to protect her children and rebuild her life. Join us as we dive into this emotional and uplifting story that reminds us of the strength within us all. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories to start today's journey and never miss another inspiring tale. It was one of those mornings where everything seemed just a little off-kilter. The sunlight streaming through the curtains felt too harsh, the distant hum of traffic too loud, and the steady tick of the kitchen clock too sharp. But it wasn't the world outside that had unsettled Emma Sanders, it was the conversation she'd just had with her husband, Mark. Or rather, the bombshell he had dropped. Calm and clinical. Over breakfast. "We decided to have kids too early," he had said. His voice smooth but detached. "Maybe it's not too late for an abortion." Emma had frozen, her fork midway to her mouth, the smell of buttered toast suddenly nauseating. For a moment, she thought she'd misheard. 9 years of marriage. 2 pink lines on a test that had sparked cautious joy. And now twins growing within her, yet Mark's words had stripped all of it down to nothing. She had looked at him, searching for some sign that he didn't mean it. But his face was unreadable. His eyes focused somewhere just past her shoulder as though avoiding her gaze might soften the blow. "We're still young," he continued, oblivious to the storm brewing in her. "My career is taking off. I just don't think this is the right time." It wasn't anger she felt in that moment, at least. Not immediately. It was more like the floor beneath her had disappeared, leaving her suspended in a freefall of disbelief. "Too soon," she had finally whispered, her voice trembling. "Too soon after 9 years. Mark, what was the right time then?" He had shrugged, running a hand through his hair in that way he always did when he wanted to seem thoughtful. It was a gesture she once found endearing. But now it felt infuriatingly dismissive. "I'm just saying," he replied. "We rushed into this. We should have waited. Maybe it's not too late to rethink." Rethink. The word echoed in Emma's mind long after she had stormed out of the house. Unable to bear another second of his calculated indifference, she hadn't even bothered to grab her coat, despite the January chill. And now the car's heater was struggling to warm her trembling hands. As she gripped the steering wheel, the anger began to seep in, sharp and unrelenting. How could he say those things? How could the man she had built a life with, the man who had once dreamed with her of a home filled with laughter and love, suddenly decide it wasn't convenient anymore? Her thoughts spiraled, each one feeding the fire inside her. She thought of Astrid, her closest friend, and how her husband had doted on her throughout her pregnancy. Late-night cravings met with enthusiasm, feet massaged without complaint, and whispered reassurances that they were in it together. Emma had envied them in a small, harmless way, but now the comparison was a knife twisting in her chest. Astrid's husband had treated her pregnancy as a blessing. Mark treated it like a prison sentence. Emma blinked rapidly, her vision blurring as tears threatened to spill over. "No," she thought. "Not now. Not while I'm driving." She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. But the memory of his words kept replaying in brutal clarity. Maybe it's not too late. As if the lives growing inside her were mere inconveniences, something to be erased with a stroke of a pen. Her hand instinctively moved to her belly, resting there as though to shield her unborn children from the cold reality of their father's rejection. "I won't let him hurt you," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I won't let him take you away." The road ahead blurred again, and Emma realized too late that she had drifted into another lane. The blaring honk of a horn jolted her back to the present, but not in time to avoid the inevitable. The impact was sudden, violent, and deafening. Her car lurched forward as another vehicle slammed into her rear, the sound of crunching metal and shattering glass filling the air. Emma's head struck the steering wheel, and everything went black. When she came to, it was to the faint hum of voices, distant and distorted. Her head throbbed, her vision swimming as she tried to focus on the figure leaning into her window. "Hey, are you okay? Can you hear me?" The voice was male, urgent but kind. "You're pregnant, aren't you?" Emma blinked, her mind struggling to piece together what had happened. The man, dark-haired, mid-30s, was peering at her with concern etched deeply into his features. "I called for an ambulance," he said quickly. "They're on their way. Just stay with me. Okay?" Pregnant. The word snapped her into full awareness. Her hands flew to her belly, panic surging through her. "The babies," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Are they?" "They'll be okay," the man said, though his tone carried a hint of uncertainty. "We'll get you to the hospital, and they'll take care of everything." The sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Emma felt herself fading again, the pain in her head and abdomen pulling her under. But before the darkness swallowed her completely, she heard the man's voice one last time, steady and reassuring. "I won't let anything happen to you." Later, she would learn his name, Dr. Ethan Harris, a renowned surgeon with a reputation for taking on the impossible. But in that moment, he was just a stranger who had promised to keep her and her children safe. As the ambulance doors closed and the world blurred into the sound of sirens and rushing wind, Emma clung to that promise like a lifeline. She had lost so much already: her trust in Mark, her belief in the life they had built together. But she would not lose her children. Not now. Not ever. Emma awoke to the steady beep of monitors and the sterile brightness of fluorescent lights. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The room felt unfamiliar, the hum of medical equipment a faint backdrop to the pounding in her head. Slowly, the events of the accident came rushing back: the collision, the stranger's voice, and the unbearable fear for her unborn children. Her hand instinctively moved to her belly, her breath catching in her throat as she waited for some sign. Any sign that her babies were still with her. Relief washed over her when she felt the familiar swell and faint movement beneath her fingers. Tears stung her eyes, and she whispered softly, "You're still here. Thank you." The door creaked open, and a nurse entered, her expression warm but professional. "Good to see you awake, Mrs. Sanders," she said, checking the monitors with practiced efficiency. "You gave us quite a scare." Emma tried to speak, but her throat felt raw, her voice coming out in a raspy whisper. "The babies. Are they okay?" The nurse paused, her eyes softening. "The doctors have been keeping a close eye on them," she reassured Emma. "Both heartbeats are strong, and there's no immediate cause for concern." "You're very lucky." The words "very lucky" echoed in Emma's mind. She didn't feel lucky. She felt broken, physically, emotionally, and mentally. Her gaze drifted to the window, where the pale light of late afternoon filtered through the blinds. Outside, the world went on, indifferent to the storm raging inside her. The nurse finished her checks and offered a gentle smile. "Dr. Harris will be in to see you shortly. He's been personally overseeing your case." Dr. Harris. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but Emma couldn't place it. She nodded weakly, her energy drained, and closed her eyes, hoping for a moment of peace. It wasn't long before the door opened again, this time admitting a tall man with dark hair and a calm, commanding presence. His blue scrubs were neatly pressed, and his expression was both reassuring and serious. Emma recognized him immediately as the man who had helped her at the scene of the accident. "Mrs. Sanders," he greeted her with a nod, his voice steady and warm. "I'm Dr. Ethan Harris. I was at the accident site, and I've been looking after you and your babies since you were admitted." Emma studied him for a moment, her emotions a whirlwind of gratitude and residual fear. "Thank you," she managed, her voice still hoarse. You saved me." Dr. Harris shook his head slightly. "I did what anyone would have done," he said, though there was a quiet sincerity in his tone that made her believe he meant it. "How are you feeling?" My head hurts, she admitted, her hand moving to her temple. And my stomach, there's a dull ache. He nodded, his expression grave but composed. You sustained a mild concussion and some abdominal trauma from the impact, he explained. We've been monitoring you closely to ensure there's no lasting damage. So far, everything looks stable. But we're keeping you here for a few more days just to be safe. Emma's mind latched onto the word stable, clinging to it like a lifeline. Stable was good. Stable meant her babies were okay, for now. But the weight of uncertainty pressed down on her, threatening to suffocate her fragile sense of relief. Dr. Harris, she began hesitantly, her voice trembling. If something happens, if I can't, her words faltered. The thought too painful to finish. Dr. Harris met her gaze, his expression softening. Nothing's going to happen to you, Emma, he said firmly, his use of her first name surprising her. You're strong. And so are your babies. We're going to get through this together. The reassurance in his voice felt like a balm. But Emma couldn't shake the lingering doubt. She had already lost so much, her trust in Mark, the stability of her marriage, the thought of losing her children, the only light in her darkened world, was too much to bear. As if sensing her turmoil, Dr. Harris pulled a chair closer to her bed and sat down. I know this is overwhelming, he said gently, but you're not alone in this. You have a medical team who cares about you. And you have those two little fighters growing inside you. Focus on them. On their strength. Let that be your anchor. Emma nodded, tears spilling over as she placed her hands on her belly. They're all I have, she whispered. I don't know how to do this alone. You're not alone, Dr. Harris repeated, his voice steady. And you're stronger than you think. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another nurse, who entered with a clipboard and a reassuring smile. Just a quick update on your test results, Dr. Harris, she said, handing him the paperwork. He scanned the pages, his brow furrowing slightly. Emma's heart raced as she watched his expression, searching for any hint of bad news. After a moment, he looked up and offered her a small smile. Everything looks good so far, he said. But we'll keep monitoring just to be safe. Emma nodded, her shoulders relaxing slightly. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself a small glimmer of hope. Her babies were still with her, and she wasn't facing this fight alone. As Dr. Harris stood to leave, he paused at the door and turned back to her. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask, he said. I'll be checking in on you regularly. Thank you, Emma replied, her voice soft but sincere. She watched him leave, his calm presence lingering in the room even after he was gone. Alone once more, Emma rested her head against the pillow, her hands never leaving her belly. She closed her eyes and whispered a silent promise to her unborn children. No matter what, I'll protect you. I'll be strong for you. I won't let you down. The days in the hospital stretched long, each one filled with a strange mix of dread and gratitude. Emma spent most of her time staring at the ceiling or gazing out the window, her thoughts a tangled web of fear, hope, and regret. The nurses were kind, offering gentle smiles and soft reassurances. But their words often felt distant, like echoes in a vast, empty space. Her only solace came from the faint movements of her babies. Every kick, every flutter was a reminder that they were still with her, fighting alongside her. Emma talked to them often, whispering words of love and promises of a brighter future. Even as her own confidence wavered, Dr. Harris visited daily, his presence a welcome reprieve from the monotony of her hospital room. He was always calm, always composed, but there was a warmth in his demeanor that put Emma at ease. He never rushed through their conversations, taking the time to answer her questions and address her concerns with patience and empathy. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the window, Dr. Harris entered the room carrying a folder of test results. Emma sat up slightly, her heart pounding with anticipation. She had learned to read his expressions over the past few days. and the subtle crease in his brow told her he had something important to share. "Emma," he began, his voice steady but tinged with gravity. "I've gone over your latest scans and blood work. Everything with the babies still looks stable. But," he hesitated, his gaze softening, "there's something we need to discuss about your health." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She gripped the edge of the blanket, her knuckles turning white. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Harris pulled up a chair and sat down beside her bed. His tone gentle but firm. "The abdominal pain you've been experiencing isn't just from the impact of the accident. The scans revealed a growth, most likely a tumor, near your liver. We'll need to run additional tests to confirm. But it's something we need to address." The room seemed to tilt, the air growing heavy as Emma tried to process his words. A tumor. The word echoed in her mind, cold and unrelenting. Is it cancer?" she managed, her voice trembling. Dr. Harris hesitated before replying, his gaze steady. "It's too early to say for certain. But I promise you, we'll do everything we can to get answers and develop a plan that prioritizes both your health and the health of your babies." Emma felt her chest tighten, her thoughts spiraling into a storm of worst-case scenarios. She had already lost so much: her trust in Mark, her sense of stability, and now this. The weight of it all threatened to crush her. But she forced herself to take a deep breath, her hands instinctively moving to her belly. "What about them?" she asked, her voice breaking. Will this hurt my babies?" Dr. Harris leaned forward, his expression resolute. "Right now, they're stable. And we're doing everything possible to keep it that way. If we confirm that the growth is cancerous, we'll adjust any treatment to ensure their safety." Emma nodded slowly, her mind still reeling. She wanted to scream, to cry, to rail against the unfairness of it all. But she knew she couldn't afford to fall apart. Not now. Not when her babies needed her. "Okay," she said finally, her voice shaky but determined. "Let's do whatever we need to do." Dr. Harris offered her a small, encouraging smile. "That's the strength your babies need," he said. "And you won't face this alone. Emma, I'm here every step of the way." As he left the room, Emma let out a shaky breath, her hands trembling as she wiped away the tears that had begun to fall. She closed her eyes, leaning back against the pillow, and whispered a silent prayer. She wasn't particularly religious, but in that moment, she needed to believe in something greater than herself. "Please," she murmured, her voice cracking, "let me make it through this. Let my babies make it through this." The following days were a whirlwind of tests, consultations, and sleepless nights. Emma felt like she was trapped in a never-ending cycle of uncertainty, her body and mind both stretched to their limits. She tried to stay strong, but there were moments when the weight of it all threatened to break her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the room in a soft golden glow, Emma found herself staring at a photograph on her phone. It was from a happier time, a beach vacation with Mark, the two of them laughing as they posed in the sand. The memory felt like it belonged to a different lifetime. Her thoughts drifted to Mark, his betrayal still a raw wound in her heart. She wondered if he even cared that she was in the hospital, that their children were fighting for their lives. A part of her wanted to call him, to beg for his support. But she knew it would only bring more pain. "You don't need him," she whispered to herself, her voice firm despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. "You're stronger than this." As the night deepened, Emma resolved to focus on what mattered most: her babies. They were her light in the darkness, her reason to keep fighting. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she would face them with unwavering determination. The days blended into one another as Emma's life became a routine of hospital procedures, whispered reassurances to her babies, and moments of silent reflection. She had always considered herself a strong person, but the events of the past weeks tested her resilience in ways she had never imagined. Dr. Harris remained a constant presence, a beacon of stability in her turbulent world. Each day, He checked on her, discussing test results, treatment plans, and what the future might hold. There was a kindness in his eyes that made Emma feel seen not just as a patient, but as a person. His quiet support gave her a sense of strength, even when the weight of her circumstances felt unbearable. One evening, as a soft rain tapped against the hospital window, Dr. Harris entered Emma's room with a look of cautious optimism. In his hands was a folder of results from her latest round of tests. Emma straightened in bed, her heart pounding as she braced herself for what he might say. "Emma," he began, pulling up a chair beside her bed. "We have some answers." Her stomach tightened. "And?" He opened the folder, his expression calm but serious. "The growth is indeed cancerous. It's a rare but treatable form, and it's still in its early stages. That's the good news." Emma exhaled, a mix of relief and fear washing over her. "And the bad news?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Harris hesitated, his gaze softening. "The location of the tumor makes treatment complicated. We need to act quickly, but we also have to be incredibly careful to protect your babies. It's a delicate balance." Emma's hands instinctively moved to her belly, her fingers trembling. "What are the options?" "We can start chemotherapy," Dr. Harris explained, his tone measured. "There are protocols specifically designed for pregnant women, and we'll tailor the treatment to minimize any risk to the twins. However, there's no guarantee it won't affect them." Emma nodded slowly, her mind racing. The thought of chemotherapy terrified her, but the alternative, doing nothing, was even more frightening. She had already lost so much. She couldn't bear the thought of losing her babies. "2. I'll do it," she said firmly, her voice steadier than she felt. "Whatever it takes to give them a chance." Dr. Harris placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll start as soon as possible. You're not alone in this, Emma. We'll get through it together." As he left the room, Emma stared out the window, her reflection merging with the rain-soaked cityscape beyond. The weight of her decision settled over her, but there was also a spark of determination in her chest. She had chosen to fight not just for herself, but for the two tiny lives growing inside her. The first round of chemotherapy was grueling. Emma had always prided herself on her strength, but the treatment left her feeling weak, nauseous, and drained of energy. Her once vivid dreams of holding her babies were replaced by restless nights and fitful sleep. Despite the physical toll, Emma refused to give in to despair. She clung to the moments of connection with her babies, savoring every kick and movement as a reminder of why she was enduring this pain. Each day, she whispered promises to them, her voice trembling but resolute. "You're going to make it," she said one morning, her hand resting protectively on her belly. "We're going to make it. I won't let anything happen to you." Her determination was tested when Mark finally called. It had been weeks since the accident, and Emma had stopped expecting him to reach out. The sound of his voice on the other end of the line brought a surge of conflicting emotions: anger, sadness, and a faint, unwelcome hope. "I heard you're in the hospital," he said, his tone flat. "How are you?" Emma gripped the phone tightly, her jaw clenched. "I'm alive. If that's what you're asking," she replied coldly. "The babies are alive, too. But I'm sure you already knew that." There was a long pause on the other end before Mark spoke again. I didn't know it was this serious," he said, his voice faltering. "I'm sorry, Emma." "Sorry," she snapped, her voice rising. "You're sorry? You abandoned me, Mark. You walked away when I needed you most. And now you think an apology is going to fix everything?" Mark sighed heavily. "I didn't know how to handle it," he admitted. "I wasn't ready for any of this. But I want to help now. If you'll let me." Emma closed her eyes, tears spilling down her cheeks. She wanted to believe him, to believe that he had changed. But the hurt ran too deep. "It's not about me anymore," she said quietly. "It's about them. If you want to be in their lives, you have to prove it." Mark hesitated before responding. I will, he said finally. I'll prove it. Emma ended the call, her heart heavy with uncertainty. She didn't know if Mark would follow through on his promise. But she couldn't afford to dwell on it. Her focus had to remain on her babies and the battle ahead. As the weeks passed, Emma found strength in unexpected places. The hospital staff became like a second family, their kindness and support lifting her spirits on even the darkest days. Dr. Harris continued to be her rock, guiding her through each step of her treatment with unwavering compassion. And through it all, her babies kept fighting. Each ultrasound brought a flicker of hope, a reminder that they were holding on. Emma marveled at their resilience, drawing strength from their tiny but powerful presence. One night, as she lay in bed, she felt a particularly strong kick from one of the twins. A laugh escaped her lips, surprising her with its brightness. You're feisty, she whispered, a smile breaking through her exhaustion. Just like your mama. For the first time in weeks, Emma allowed herself to hope. They had a long road ahead, but she was determined to see it through. Together, they would face whatever came next, one step, one day at a time. The hospital became Emma's world, a small island in the vast ocean of uncertainty. Days turned into weeks, each one a test of her strength and resolve. The chemotherapy sessions were relentless, their side effects often leaving her bedridden and racked with nausea. Yet, through it all, Emma clung to the thought of her babies, her determination unwavering. Dr. Harris continued to visit her daily, his presence a constant source of comfort. He had a way of grounding her, of making the chaos of her circumstances feel just a little more manageable. She often found herself looking forward to their conversations, even when they revolved around difficult topics. One afternoon, as the winter sunlight filtered through the hospital window, Dr. Harris arrived with the results of her latest scans. Emma's heart pounded as she sat up in bed, bracing herself for what he might say. The treatment is working, he began, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. The tumor has started to shrink. It's a good sign. Relief washed over Emma like a wave, her shoulders sagging as the tension she hadn't realized she was holding finally released. That's amazing, she whispered, her voice trembling. Does this mean the babies? They're doing well, Dr. Harris assured her. Their heart rates are strong, and there's no indication that the chemotherapy has affected their development so far. We'll continue to monitor them closely, but I'm optimistic. For the first time in weeks, Emma allowed herself to breathe deeply. She placed a hand on her belly, feeling the faint movements of her twins. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. Dr. Harris shook his head, his expression soft. You don't have to. Just keep fighting. Emma, that's all that matters. The good news brought a renewed sense of purpose to Emma's days. She began to regain some of her strength, pushing herself to move around her room and even take short walks down the hospital corridors. Each step felt like a victory, a testament to her resilience. Her interactions with the hospital staff became more frequent, and she began to form bonds with the nurses and other patients. There was a sense of camaraderie in their shared struggles, a quiet understanding that didn't require words. One evening, as Emma sat in the lounge area, she struck up a conversation with an elderly woman named Margaret. Margaret had been in the hospital for months, battling a chronic illness that often left her weak and bedridden. Despite her frailty, she had a sharp wit and a warmth that drew people to her. You remind me of myself when I was younger, Margaret said, her eyes twinkling. Stubborn, determined, and a little bit reckless. Emma laughed, the sound surprising even herself. I don't feel very strong most days, she admitted. But I don't really have a choice. Do I? Margaret reached out and placed a hand on Emma's. You do have a choice, she said firmly. And you've made the right one. Those babies of yours are lucky to have you. Emma smiled, her eyes brimming with tears. Thank you, she said softly. That means a lot. The progress Emma was making physically was mirrored by a quiet transformation within her. She began to confront the emotions she had buried deep. The anger and sadness that had threatened to consume her after Mark's betrayal. She allowed herself to feel the pain, to sit with it, and, slowly, to let it go. Her thoughts often drifted to the life she had envisioned before everything had fallen apart. She had dreamed of a happy family, of watching her children grow up with the love and support of both parents. That dream had been shattered. But in its place, a new one was taking shape, one where she and her babies created their own kind of happiness. One that didn't depend on anyone else. Mark had called a few more times, his tone oscillating between guilt and half-hearted attempts at reconciliation. Each conversation left Emma feeling more resolved. She didn't need his pity or his empty promises. She needed to focus on the future, on the life she was building for herself and her children. One cold January morning, Emma woke to a sharp, insistent pain in her lower abdomen. Panic surged through her as she struggled to sit up, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. "Nurse," she called, her voice trembling. Within moments, a nurse rushed in, followed closely by Dr. Harris. "What's wrong, Emma?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with concern. I don't know," she stammered. "It hurts. It feels different." Dr. Harris quickly examined her, his expression growing serious. "It's possible that the twins are getting ready to come," he said. "We need to run some tests to be sure." Emma's heart raced as the nurses wheeled her down the hall to the maternity ward. The prospect of her babies arriving early filled her with both hope and fear. She wasn't ready, not yet, but she also knew that she might not have a choice. Hours passed in a blur of monitoring and medical jargon. Finally, Dr. Harris returned with the results. "It's not labor," he said, his tone reassuring. "But we're seeing some signs of stress on the twins. We'll need to keep you under close observation for the next few days." Emma nodded, relief mingling with lingering anxiety. "Thank you," she murmured, her hand still cradling her belly. "Just, please, make sure they're okay." Dr. Harris met her gaze, his expression resolute. "I will. You have my word." As she was wheeled back to her room, Emma closed her eyes and whispered a silent prayer. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain: she would do whatever it took to protect her babies. They were her everything, and she wasn't about to let them go. The days following the scare were a mixture of calm and anticipation. Emma stayed in her hospital bed, her movements limited to ensure the twins' safety. Though the inactivity often left her restless, she reminded herself of the stakes. Every day her babies remained inside her womb was a victory, one that brought them closer to a safer arrival. Her hospital room became a sanctuary of sorts. The walls were adorned with cards and flowers sent by her colleagues and a few friends. Each message brought a small smile to her lips, a reminder that she wasn't entirely alone. Dr. Harris had even brought a small potted plant to brighten the room, a gesture that spoke of his quiet kindness. One morning, as the snow fell softly outside her window, Emma decided to write a letter to her twins. She wanted them to know how much they were loved, even if she wasn't around to tell them herself. The thought was bittersweet, but it gave her comfort to imagine their little hands one day holding the words she had written for them. She began slowly, her handwriting careful as she balanced the paper on her knees. "My dearest Jack and Jill, you haven't even been born yet, but you've already changed my life in ways I never imagined. From the moment I knew you existed, you became my world, my light in the darkest times. I've felt every flutter, every kick, and each one has reminded me of your strength and determination to be here. Life hasn't been easy, and there have been moments when I've been scared. But every time I think of you, I find a new kind of courage. You've given me something to fight for, something to believe in. I want you to know that no matter what happens, I will always be with you, cheering you on, loving you with all that I am. You are my miracles, my reason for everything. Never forget that you are deeply loved." Not just by me, but by the world waiting to welcome you. With all my heart. Mom. She set the pen down. Her hands trembling slightly. Reading the words over, she felt a mix of emotions: hope, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of love. Carefully, she folded the letter and tucked it into the drawer beside her bed. That afternoon, Dr. Harris stopped by for his routine check-in. He was carrying a clipboard, his expression serious but not alarming. "I have good news," he said, taking a seat beside her. "The stress indicators on the twins have stabilized, and their growth is on track. If everything continues like this, we can aim for a scheduled delivery in a few weeks." Emma felt a wave of relief wash over her. "That's wonderful," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." Dr. Harris hesitated, his eyes searching hers. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "And I don't just mean physically." Emma considered his question for a moment before answering. "Some days are harder than others," she admitted. "But I've learned to focus on the little victories. Hearing their heartbeats, knowing they're okay, it keeps me going." Dr. Harris nodded, his respect for her resilience evident. "You've been through so much, Emma. It's okay to lean on others when you need to." She managed a small smile. "I'm trying," she said. "It's just hard to trust people after everything." As the weeks passed, Emma continued to write in her journal, documenting her thoughts and experiences. It became a therapeutic outlet, a way to process everything she was going through. She wrote about her hopes for the twins, the lessons she wanted to teach them, and the kind of life she dreamed of building for them. One entry stood out as particularly poignant. "Today, I realized something important. Strength isn't about never feeling afraid or broken. It's about finding the will to keep going, even when everything feels impossible. My babies are teaching me that every day. They're fighters, just like their mom. And together, we'll face whatever comes our way." The closer Emma got to her delivery date, the more she allowed herself to feel excited. She imagined holding Jack and Jill for the first time, seeing their tiny faces, and hearing their cries. The thought filled her with both joy and an ache of longing. But there were moments when fear crept in, unbidden. What if the cancer returned? What if she wasn't enough for them? These thoughts gnawed at her during the quiet hours of the night. But she forced herself to push them aside. For now, her job was to bring them safely into the world. On a crisp February morning, Emma woke to a familiar yet unmistakable pain. This time, she knew. The twins were coming. The medical team sprang into action. And within minutes, she was being prepped for an emergency C-section. Dr. Harris stayed by her side, his calm demeanor a steadying force. "Emma," he said as they wheeled her into the operating room, "we're ready. You've done everything right. Now, let us take care of the rest." She nodded, her heart pounding with a mix of nerves and anticipation. "Just, please, make sure they're okay," she whispered. "You have my word," he replied. The bright lights of the operating room blurred as the anesthetic took effect. Emma felt a strange calm settle over her. Her thoughts focused solely on her babies. When the first cry pierced the room, her eyes filled with tears. "A girl," one of the nurses announced, holding up the tiny, squirming baby. Moments later, another cry joined the first. "And a boy." Emma's heart swelled as she caught a glimpse of them before they were whisked away to be cleaned and checked. They were perfect. Her miracles. Her everything. As she drifted into a dreamlike haze, a single thought echoed in her mind: we made it. When Emma woke up, the room was bathed in the soft glow of late afternoon sunlight streaming through the window. Her body ached, and there was a strange heaviness in her chest as if the emotional toll of the past months had finally settled. She blinked slowly, her mind catching up to her surroundings. "Emma!" A warm, familiar voice brought her back to the present. She turned her head to see Dr. Harris standing beside her bed. A rare, genuine smile on his face. In his arms, swaddled in soft blankets, were her newborns. They're perfect, he said softly, stepping closer. Would you like to hold them? Tears immediately welled in Emma's eyes as she nodded. Yes. Please, she whispered. Dr. Harris carefully placed Jack in her arms first. The tiny baby wriggled slightly, his face scrunching up before relaxing into the comfort of her warmth. Emma stared down at him, her heart swelling with an indescribable mix of love and awe. She marveled at his delicate features, the tiny nose, the soft curve of his lips, the way his tiny fingers curled into a fist. And now, Jill, Dr. Harris said, placing the little girl beside her brother. Jill let out a small cry, but as soon as she nestled against Emma's chest, she quieted, as though she instinctively knew she was safe. Emma looked down at her twins, unable to stop the tears streaming down her face. Hi, my darlings, she whispered, her voice trembling. I've been waiting so long to meet you. The moment felt surreal. After all the pain, fear, and uncertainty, here they were, alive, healthy, and hers. She kissed each of their foreheads, her tears dotting their soft skin. Her heart felt full in a way she hadn't thought possible. Dr. Harris gave her a few minutes before speaking again. They're strong, Emma. Jack's doing well, and Jill is stable after her initial checkup. She'll need a bit of extra monitoring because of her heart condition. But we're optimistic. Emma nodded, her gaze never leaving her babies. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you for everything. It's not just me. Dr. Harris replied gently. You fought for them, Emma. You gave them this chance. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions. Emma stayed in the hospital, recovering from the C-section while adjusting to the demands of caring for her twins. Nurses came and went, helping her with feedings and offering advice. But it was clear that Emma was determined to do as much as she could on her own. Jack was a quiet, observant baby, content to sleep in her arms or watch the world with wide, curious eyes. Jill, on the other hand, had a feisty spirit, her cries loud and insistent whenever she needed something. Emma smiled at their budding personalities, already so distinct. One evening, as Emma rocked Jill to sleep, a nurse entered the room with a clipboard. Mrs. Carter, I just need to confirm a few details for the birth certificates. Have you decided on their names? Emma's smile widened as she glanced down at her daughter. Jack and Jill, she said confidently. The nurse hesitated, her pen poised over the paper. Like the nursery rhyme? Emma chuckled softly. Yes. But it's more than that. These names, they're a promise to my children. A reminder that no matter how many hills they have to climb in life, they'll always have each other. The nurse smiled, understanding the sentiment. That's beautiful, she said, jotting down the names before leaving the room. As the days turned into weeks, Emma's focus shifted to planning their future. She knew she couldn't stay in the hospital forever, and the prospect of raising twins on her own was daunting. Her finances were limited, and the thought of returning to work while managing their medical needs seemed nearly impossible. One afternoon, Dr. Harris stopped by with an unexpected offer. Emma, I've been thinking about your situation, he began, his tone hesitant but sincere. There's a program at the hospital for single parents with high medical expenses. It could help cover some of the costs for Jill's treatments and ease your financial burden. Emma's eyes widened in surprise. That's incredible. I didn't even know something like that existed. Dr. Harris smiled. You've been through so much, Emma. You deserve support. And I'm here to help you navigate it. Emma felt a surge of gratitude. Thank you, she said, her voice filled with emotion. I don't know what I would have done without you. You're stronger than you think, he replied, his voice steady. But even the strongest people need help sometimes. Despite the challenges, Emma found joy in the smallest moments. The way Jack's tiny hand would wrap around her finger, or the way Jill's laughter filled the room like music. Every day brought new milestones and memories, each one a testament to their resilience. She also began to notice how much she had grown. The uncertainty and fear that once defined her had been replaced by a quiet determination. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. Fueled by her love for her children and the hope of a better future. One evening, as she tucked Jack and Jill into their cribs, Emma sat by the window, staring out at the city lights. She thought about all the people who had helped her along the way, Dr. Harris, the nurses, even strangers who had offered words of encouragement. They had shown her that even in the darkest times, there was always light to be found. Her mind drifted to Graham, the man who had once been her partner but had become a distant memory. She no longer felt anger or bitterness toward him. Only pity. He had chosen to walk away. But in doing so, he had missed out on the most beautiful part of their lives. As the twins stirred softly in their sleep, Emma smiled, her heart full. She didn't know what the future held, but she was ready to face it. For Jack and Jill, she would move mountains, climb hills, and weather any storm. They were her reason, her strength, her everything. The weeks turned into months, and Emma gradually settled into a new rhythm with Jack and Jill. Life was anything but easy, but the joy her twins brought far outweighed the challenges. Every day was a lesson in patience, resilience, and love. Her small apartment became their sanctuary, a safe haven where laughter echoed off the walls and tiny milestones became monumental victories. One morning, as Emma fed Jill while Jack played with a soft rattle, the sound of her phone buzzing broke the calm. She glanced at the screen and saw an unfamiliar number. Hesitating for a moment, she picked up. "Hello, Emma Carter." The voice on the other end was warm and professional. "This is Abigail from the Single Parent Support Network. Dr. Harris mentioned you might be a good fit for our community programs." Emma blinked in surprise. "Oh, yes. Dr. Harris told me about you. Thank you for reaching out. We have a variety of resources that might help." Abigail continued. "Workshops, childcare assistance, even job placement services. We'd love to have you join one of our sessions." Emma's heart swelled with gratitude. "That sounds amazing. I'll definitely look into it." After ending the call, Emma sat for a moment, holding Jill close. The weight of her circumstances still loomed, but she felt lighter, knowing she wasn't alone. There were people out there willing to help her rebuild her life, step by step. The first time Emma attended a workshop, she was nervous. She left Jack and Jill with a trusted neighbor and walked into the community center with hesitant steps. The room buzzed with chatter as other single parents shared stories and exchanged advice. Emma felt out of place at first, but then a woman with kind eyes and a welcoming smile approached her. "Hi. I'm Claire," she said, extending her hand. "First time here?" Emma nodded. "Yes. I wasn't sure if I should come, but you made the right choice," Claire said warmly. "We're all in the same boat, more or less. It helps to have people who understand." As the session began, Emma found herself opening up about her struggles juggling 2 newborns, navigating Jill's medical needs, and trying to make ends meet. To her surprise, the group responded with empathy and encouragement. By the end of the day, she had exchanged phone numbers with several parents and felt a newfound sense of hope. Claire, in particular, became a fast friend. A mother of 3, she had an infectious optimism that seemed to brighten even the darkest days. She often dropped by Emma's apartment with small gifts for the twins or stayed to chat over a cup of tea. Her support became a lifeline for Emma, a reminder that she wasn't facing this journey alone. One afternoon, as Emma folded laundry with Jack babbling beside her and Jill napping nearby, there was a knock at the door. She opened it to find Dr. Harris standing there, a sheepish smile on his face. "Dr. Harris," she said, surprised. "What brings you here?" "I was in the neighborhood," he said, holding up a bag of groceries. "Thought you could use a little extra." Emma's cheeks flushed with gratitude as she stepped aside to let him in. "You didn't have to do that." He shrugged, setting the bag on the counter. It's the least I could do. How are the little ones? They're doing great, Emma said, her pride evident. Jack's a bit ahead on his milestones. And Jill is holding her own. We've got a follow-up appointment for her next week. Dr. Harris nodded, his expression softening as he glanced at the twins. You're doing an incredible job, Emma. She smiled, though a flicker of doubt passed through her eyes. Some days. It doesn't feel like it. He met her gaze, his tone firm. Trust me. It shows. You've come so far. And so have they. They talked for a while, the conversation flowing easily. Dr. Harris shared stories from his own life, his struggles as a young medical student, the doubts he had faced, and the patients who had taught him the most. Emma listened intently, grateful for his honesty and the connection they were building. Before he left, Dr. Harris paused at the door. You know, Emma, it's okay to let people in. You've been through so much. But you don't have to carry it all alone. Her eyes softened, and she nodded. I'll try. As time went on, Emma began to see her life in a new light. The fear and uncertainty that once consumed her had been replaced by a quiet determination. Every setback became an opportunity to learn. Every struggle a reminder of her strength. Her bond with Jack and Jill grew deeper with each passing day. She celebrated their first smiles, their first steps, their first words. She marveled at their resilience, their ability to find joy even in the smallest things. They were her reason for everything. But Emma also began to rediscover herself. She took on freelance writing projects during the twins' naps, pouring her thoughts into articles and stories that resonated with others. Her words, once silenced by fear, now became a source of strength not just for her, but for those who read them. And though Graham's absence still stung, Emma no longer let it define her. She had built a life of love and hope for her children. A life he had chosen not to be a part of. That was his loss, not hers. One evening, as Emma tucked Jack and Jill into bed, she sat by their cribs and whispered, "You've taught me so much, my loves. More than I ever thought possible. I promise to keep learning, to keep growing, and to give you the best life I can." She kissed their foreheads, her heart full of gratitude and love. As she turned off the light and closed the door, Emma felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. Her journey was far from over, but she was ready to face whatever came next. As the years passed, Emma's life became a testament to the power of resilience and love. Jack and Jill grew into vibrant, compassionate children, their laughter filling every corner of the home they shared. Emma, once overwhelmed by fear and uncertainty, found strength she never knew she had. She built a life of stability, joy, and purpose for her small family, cherishing every moment with her twins. Despite the struggles they faced, Jill's health challenges and the demands of single parenthood, Emma never gave up. Her community, her newfound friends, and her unwavering love for her children became the foundation on which she rebuilt her life. Jack and Jill, once fragile and uncertain, became her greatest triumph, embodying the hope and determination she had fought so hard to preserve. As she watched them run through the park one sunny afternoon, their laughter echoing in the air, Emma smiled, her heart full. She knew the road ahead would still have its challenges, but she also knew they would face it together, stronger, braver, and full of love. Thank you for joining us on this heartfelt journey. Subscribe to Life Stories for more tales of courage, compassion, and the profound lessons life teaches us. See you in the next story.